The spring social at Miller's Creek had been the talk of the territory for weeks. Eleanor Hartfield stood against the weathered wall of the community hall, her borrowed blue dress suddenly feeling too tight around her waist. She watched as couple after couple took to the dance floor, their laughter echoing through the rafters while she remained invisible. At 23, Eleanor knew she wasn't what men wanted. Too plain, too plump, too poor. Her father's debts had seen to that last part, leaving her working as a seamstress for Mrs. Patterson, mending clothes for women who wouldn't look her in the eye. "Did you really think Daniel Miller would dance with you?" Sarah Henderson's voice cut through the music. 3 girls clustered behind Sarah, their pretty faces twisted with cruel amusement. "A girl like you should know her place." Eleanor's cheeks burned. She'd been foolish to hope. Daniel had smiled at her once at the general store, and she'd let herself imagine he might ask her to dance tonight. Instead, he'd arrived with Catherine Willows on his arm, not sparing Eleanor a single glance. "At least she tried." Another girl giggled. "Though that dress does nothing for her figure." Eleanor's eyes stung. She turned toward the door, desperate to escape, when a deep voice rumbled through the tension. "This woman's with me." Every head turned. Eleanor's breath caught. The man was massive. 6.5 feet of solid muscle, with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorway. Dark hair fell past his collar, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his strong jaw. But it was his eyes that held her frozen, pale gray, like winter sky, and fixed directly on her. She'd seen him around Miller's Creek a handful of times over the past year. Jackson Stone, the man who'd bought the abandoned Thornton Ranch up in the high country and disappeared into the mountains. People whispered about him, about the scars on his hands, about how he never smiled, about the way he'd knocked out 3 men who'd tried to rob the bank last fall. He wasn't the kind of man who came to socials. "We're not," Eleanor stammered. Jackson crossed the room in 4 long strides. The crowd parted for him like water. He stopped in front of her, and Eleanor had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Up close, she could see the small scar through his left eyebrow, the hardness around his mouth, the way his large hands hung loose at his sides as if ready for trouble. "You ready to dance?" His voice was rough, like gravel tumbling in a creek. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. "I don't." "Good." He extended one massive hand. "Let's show these folks how it's done." Sarah Henderson's mouth opened and closed like a fish. The other girls stared in shock. Even Daniel Miller had stopped dancing to watch. Eleanor placed her trembling hand in Jackson's. His palm dwarfed hers, warm and calloused, and surprisingly gentle as his fingers closed around hers. He led her to the center of the floor as the fiddler struck up a waltz. "I'm not a very good dancer," Eleanor whispered as he placed his other hand at her waist. The heat of it burned through the thin fabric of her dress. "Neither am I." The corner of his mouth twitched. "Hold on." He swept her into the dance, and Eleanor forgot to breathe. For such a large man, he moved with surprising grace, guiding her effortlessly through the steps. She could feel the strength in his arms, the controlled power in every movement. Against his broad chest, she felt small, protected, like she could disappear into him and be safe from every cruel word ever spoken to her. "Why?" she managed to ask as they turned. His grey eyes studied her face. "Why what? Why did you—" "Those girls were right. I'm nobody. Why would you—" "Those girls are fools." His voice dropped lower, intimate, despite the crowd around them. "And you're not nobody, Eleanor Hartfield." She stumbled, and his arm tightened around her waist, steadying her. "You know my name? Knew your father. Good man. Sorry about his passing." Eleanor blinked back sudden tears. Papa had died 6 months ago, leaving her alone and drowning in his debts. No one at the social had mentioned him. No one had offered condolences. But this hard, silent mountain man remembered. "Thank you," she whispered. They danced in silence after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Eleanor let herself relax into his hold, let herself pretend for just a moment that this was real, that a man like Jackson Stone might actually want to dance with a woman like her, that she wasn't the object of pity or charity. When the music ended, Jackson didn't immediately release her. His hand remained at her waist, his fingers still wrapped around hers. He looked down at her with an expression she couldn't read. "I need to go," he said finally. Eleanor nodded, stepping back. Of course he needed to go. He'd done his good deed for the evening, rescued the pathetic girl from humiliation. Now he could return to his mountain and forget she existed. Wait, his hand caught her elbow as she turned away. Walk with me. Outside. Too damn hot in here. Brrr, the night air was cool against Eleanor's flushed cheeks. Jackson guided her away from the hall, toward the edge of town, where the grasslands stretched endlessly under the stars. She could hear the distant sound of cattle lowing, the whisper of wind through the new spring grass. They walked in silence until the music faded to a distant murmur. Jackson stopped near an old oak tree, its branches spread wide above them. "I didn't just happen to be at that social," he said. Eleanor's heart skipped. "What?" He turned to face her, and in the moonlight his features were sharper, more intense. "Came to see you." "Me? But why would you?" "Been watching you." He held up a hand when her eyes widened. "Not like that. Just noticed you in town, the way you smile at children. How you helped old Mrs. Cooper carry her packages last month. How you never complain, even though I know those ladies you sew for treat you like dirt." Eleanor's throat tightened. "You noticed all that?" "Hard not to notice you," his voice roughened. "Prettiest woman in Miller's Creek, and nobody sees it but me." A laugh escaped her, half disbelief, half something dangerously close to hope. "Mr. Stone, I appreciate what you did tonight, but you don't have to—" "Eleanor." The way he said her name made heat pool in her belly. "I don't say things I don't mean. Never have." She searched his face, looking for the lie, the joke, the pity, found none of it. Only intensity, only raw honesty that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "I don't understand," she whispered. Jackson took a step closer. He was so tall, so broad. She should feel intimidated. Instead, she felt safe, protected, seen in a way she'd never been before. "I'm not good with words," he said. "Not good with people. Been alone too long. But I know what I want." His hand lifted, hovering near her face as if afraid to touch. "If you'll have me, I'd like to court you proper." Eleanor's breath caught. "Court me? Take you to dinners, bring you flowers, whatever it is men do when they're trying to win a woman's heart." His jaw tightened. "Though I should warn you, I'm not an easy man. Got a temper sometimes. Don't talk much. Live up in the mountains and it's lonely there." "It sounds perfect," Eleanor heard herself say. His eyes widened slightly. "You mean that?" Did she? Eleanor thought about her tiny rented room above the dress shop. Thought about the whispers that followed her everywhere. Thought about the empty years stretching ahead of her, invisible and unwanted. Then she looked at Jackson Stone, this hard, scarred man who'd crossed a room full of people to defend her, who'd noticed her kindness when everyone else saw only her flaws. "I mean it," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. His hand finally made contact, cupping her cheek with a gentleness that made her eyes sting. His palm was rough against her skin, but warm, so warm. "You deserve better than me," he murmured. "That's not your decision to make." This time he did smile, just a small quirk of his lips, but it transformed his entire face, made him almost beautiful. "No, ma'am, I suppose it's not." He stepped back, and Eleanor felt the loss of his warmth like a physical ache. But he didn't go far, just held out his arm in a formal gesture that seemed oddly sweet, coming from such a rough man. "May I walk you home?" Eleanor slipped her hand through his arm, marveling at the solid strength of it. "I'd like that." They walked slowly back through town, and Eleanor didn't care that curtains twitched in windows as they passed. Didn't care that Sarah Henderson and her friends would be whispering about this for weeks. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something other than invisible. She felt chosen. When they reached the dress shop, Jackson stopped at the bottom of the stairs that led to her room. The lamp in the shop window cast golden light across his features. "I'll come by Sunday," he said. "Take you for a ride, show you the ranch." "I'd love to see it." He nodded, then hesitated. "Eleanor?" "Yes?" "Thank you." She blinked. "For what?" "For saying yes. For not running when you saw me coming." His thumb traced a small circle on the back of her hand where it rested in his arm. "For giving a man like me a chance." Before she could respond, he lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. The touch sent electricity racing up her arm. Then he released her and stepped back. "Good night, Eleanor." "Good night, Jackson." She watched him walk away, his broad shoulders disappearing into the darkness. Only when he was completely gone did she float up the stairs to her room, her hand still tingling where he'd kissed it. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Eleanor lay in her narrow bed, replaying every moment, every word, every touch. It seemed impossible, like a dream that would dissolve in the morning light. But when Sunday came, Jackson was there, waiting beside a wagon hitched to two sturdy horses, wearing clean clothes and holding a bouquet of wildflowers that looked comically small in his large hands. "Picked these myself," he said gruffly, handing them to her. "Hope you like them." Eleanor pressed the flowers to her face, breathing in their sweet scent. "They're beautiful." The ride to his ranch took nearly 2 hours, climbing steadily into the high country. Jackson didn't talk much, but Eleanor found she didn't mind. There was something peaceful about the silence between them, something right. When the ranch finally came into view, Eleanor gasped. The house was larger than she'd expected, a sturdy log structure with a wide porch and stone chimney. Behind it, mountains rose like sentinels, their peaks still dusted with snow. A creek ran clear and cold through the meadow, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance. "It's magnificent," she breathed. Jackson helped her down from the wagon, his hand spanning her waist completely. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, and for once, Eleanor didn't feel self-conscious about her size. In his arms, she felt delicate, feminine. "Built most of it myself," he said, setting her gently on her feet. "Still needs work, no woman's touch." He showed her around the property, pointing out the barn he was expanding, the garden plot waiting to be planted, the room he'd added to the house last fall. With each detail, Eleanor could see him watching her, gauging her reaction, as if her opinion mattered, as if she mattered. "What do you think?" he asked finally, stopping on the porch. The view stretched endlessly before them. Rolling grassland, distant mountains, sky so blue it hurt to look at. "I think it's the most beautiful place I've ever seen." "Lonely, though," his voice dropped. "Real lonely for one person." Eleanor turned to find him looking at her with an intensity that stole her breath. She knew what he was asking, without him saying the words. "It wouldn't have to be," she said softly. Jackson moved closer, backing her gently against the porch railing. He was so large, blocking out the sun, blocking out the world, making it so all she could see, all she could feel, was him. "Eleanor," her name was a rumble in his chest. "I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not a patient man. Been alone too long. Want things I probably shouldn't want yet." "What things?" The question came out breathless. His eyes darkened. "Want to wake up to you every morning, want to come home to you every night, want to build a life here with you." His hand came up, fingers threading into her hair. "Want you in my bed, warming it, warming me, making this house a home." Eleanor's pulse raced. She should be scandalized, should pull away from such forward talk. Instead, she leaned into his touch. "How long do we have to wait?" she whispered. Jackson's breath caught. "For what? For all of that? For everything you just said?" "Eleanor, I'm asking you to marry me." His thumb stroked her cheek. "Asking you to be my wife. But I won't rush you, won't push. We can court proper for as long as you need." "What if I don't want to wait?" The boldness of her own words shocked her. But why should they wait? She'd spent 23 years being invisible, being unwanted, and now this man, this hard, honest man, wanted her, wanted to build a life with her. Why should she waste another moment being sensible? "Eleanor," Jackson's voice was strained. "Don't say things like that unless you mean them." "I mean them." She placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath her palm. "I've never meant anything more in my life." His control visibly snapped. He pulled her against him, one arm banding around her waist while the other cradled her head. His mouth found hers in a kiss that was nothing like the chaste pecks she'd imagined. This was heat and hunger and desperate need. His lips moved against hers with barely restrained passion, and when she gasped, his tongue swept into her mouth. Eleanor had never been kissed before, never been touched with desire, but her body knew what to do. Her arms wrapped around his neck, or as far as they could reach, her fingers tangled in his long hair. She pressed herself against his hard body and kissed him back with everything she had. When Jackson finally pulled away, they were both breathing hard. His eyes were nearly black with want. "Marry me," he growled. "This week, tomorrow. I don't care. Just say yes." "Yes." Eleanor laughed, giddy with joy and desire and the sheer impossibility of it all. "Yes, yes, yes." He kissed her again. Softer this time, but no less intense. When he lifted his head, he was almost smiling. "Gonna take care of you," he murmured against her lips. "Gonna make you so damn happy. You already have." They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the church. Eleanor wore a dress she'd sewn herself, cream-colored with lace at the collar, and carried another bouquet of wildflowers. Jackson stood beside her in his Sunday best, towering over the preacher, holding her hand like it was something precious. Sarah Henderson and her friends attended, their faces twisted with shock and envy. Daniel Miller stood in the back, looking like he'd swallowed something sour, but Eleanor didn't care about any of them. She only had eyes for Jackson, for her husband, for the man who'd seen her when no one else would. That night, Jackson carried her over the threshold of their home. Their home. The word still felt impossible. He set her down gently in the bedroom, and Eleanor's nervousness must have shown on her face, because he immediately stepped back. "We don't have to do anything tonight," he said quietly. "I know this is all moving fast. Can just sleep if you want." Eleanor looked at this man who defended her, courted her, married her. This man who treated her with such care despite his rough exterior, and she knew she didn't want to wait another moment. "I don't want to just sleep," she whispered. Jackson's eyes flared. "Eleanor, I want you to show me everything." She stepped closer, placing her hands on his chest. "I want to be your wife in every way." His hands came up to frame her face, and she could feel them trembling slightly. "Never done this before, have you?" She shook her head. "I'll be gentle," he promised, voice rough. "So gentle, even though it's been years for me, even though I want you so bad I can barely breathe." The confession sent heat flooding through her. "Then show me, please." Jackson kissed her slowly, thoroughly, as his hands worked the buttons of her dress. The fabric whispered as it fell away, leaving her in just her chemise. She felt vulnerable, exposed. But when she saw the way he looked at her, like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, the fear melted away. "Perfect," he murmured, trailing kisses down her throat. "You're absolutely perfect." He lifted her onto the bed, following her down. His weight pressed her into the mattress, solid and warm and safe. Eleanor helped him remove his shirt, gasping when she saw the scars that marked his torso. Old wounds, stories he'd never told her. "Who hurt you?" she whispered, tracing one with her finger. "Doesn't matter anymore." He caught her hand, kissed her palm. "Only thing that matters is you. Us." He made love to her slowly, patiently, murmuring praise and encouragement as he introduced her to pleasures she'd never imagined. There was pain at first, but Jackson was so gentle, so careful, that it quickly faded into something else entirely, into connection, into intimacy, into a joining of not just bodies but souls. Afterward, Eleanor lay wrapped in his arms, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. His hand stroked lazily up and down her back, and she'd never felt so content, so complete. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. "None." She tilted her head to look at him. "You? Only that I didn't find you sooner." He kissed her forehead. "Could have saved us both a lot of lonely years." Eleanor snuggled closer. "We have all the time in the world now." "Yeah." His arms tightened around her. "We do." The first weeks of marriage were a revelation. Eleanor threw herself into making the house a home. She planted a garden, sowing packets of seeds Jackson had bought in town. Carrots, tomatoes, beans, squash. She spent hours on her knees in the rich soil, coaxing life from the earth while Jackson worked the cattle. The house transformed under her care. She sewed curtains for every window. Cheerful yellow gingham for the kitchen, deep blue cotton for the bedroom, cream muslin for the main room. She scrubbed floors until they gleamed, arranged wildflowers in mason jars, baked bread that filled the house with warmth and the scent of home. Jackson noticed everything. He'd come in from the fields, dust and sweat coating his skin, and stop in the doorway just to look around. "Never thought this place could feel like this," he'd say, his voice rough with emotion. Eleanor would smile and pull him inside for supper. They'd eat together at the table Jackson had built, talking about the day. He'd tell her about a calf being born, a fence that needed mending, his plans to build a new barn come fall. She'd share stories about the garden, about the dress she was sewing for Mrs. Henderson from the neighboring ranch, about the rabbit she'd seen that morning. Simple conversations, ordinary moments, but to Eleanor they were everything she'd never known she needed. At night, they explored each other's bodies with growing confidence and passion. Jackson was an attentive lover, learning what made her gasp, what made her moan, what made her cry out his name. His large hands were surprisingly gentle, tracing every curve, every soft place, worshipping her body like it was something sacred. "You're so beautiful," he'd whisper against her skin. "So damn beautiful, Eleanor." And under his touch, his gaze, his reverence, Eleanor began to believe it. The years of feeling inadequate, of being told she wasn't enough, began to fade. In Jackson's arms, she was perfect, complete, wanted beyond measure. Eleanor discovered she had power too. She learned that certain touches made Jackson's breath catch, that kissing the scar on his shoulder made him groan, that running her fingers through his long hair while he held her close could make this strong, controlled man shake with need. "What are you doing to me?" he'd rasp, pulling her beneath him. "Loving you," she'd whisper back, and she did, with everything she had. But it wasn't all passion and pleasure. They also talked. Long conversations by the fire about their pasts, their dreams, their fears. One night, about 6 weeks into their marriage, Eleanor found Jackson sitting on the porch long after supper. The sun had set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. He stared out at the mountains, his expression distant. She sat beside him, saying nothing, just waited. After a long moment, he spoke. "Had a brother once, younger than me by 2 years. Name was Matthew." Eleanor's hand found his. "What happened to him?" "War took him." Jackson's voice was flat, emotionless in that way that meant he was feeling too much. "Battle of Antietam. I was there, watched him fall. Couldn't reach him in time. Oh, Jackson. Held him while he died. Promised him I'd live, that I'd make something of myself, that his death wouldn't be for nothing." He turned to look at her, and his eyes were wet. Been trying to keep that promise ever since. But this place, this ranch, it all felt empty, like I was just going through the motions. "Until you..." Eleanor's throat tightened. "He'd be proud of you, of what you've built here." "Maybe." Jackson pulled her close, tucking her against his side. "But it didn't mean anything until I had someone to share it with. You brought life back to me, Eleanor. Made me remember what I was living for." She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of him, leather and pine and something uniquely Jackson. "Tell me about him. About Matthew." So he did. Late into the night, Jackson talked about his brother, about the boy who'd loved to fish, who could make anyone laugh, who'd followed Jackson west with dreams of building something together. Eleanor listened to every word, memorizing them, holding them safe. When he finally fell silent, she spoke. "My father used to say that the people we love never really leave us. They live on in the choices we make, the kindness we show, the love we give." Jackson kissed the top of her head. "Your father was a wise man. He would have liked you." "Hope so. Hope he'd approve of me taking care of his daughter." Eleanor tilted her head back to look at him. "He'd be grateful. I'm grateful." They sat together until the stars came out, talking about their lost loved ones, sharing grief and memory and comfort. When they finally went to bed, Jackson held her close, and Eleanor felt the weight of his trust in her. He'd opened his heart, shown her his scars, the ones on his soul as well as his body. She vowed to treasure that gift, to never take it for granted. The days turned to weeks, and Eleanor's life took on a rhythm she'd never experienced before. She'd wake before dawn to Jackson kissing her shoulder, whispering goodbye before heading out to tend the cattle. She'd dress and start breakfast, watching from the kitchen window as he worked in the distance, his broad shoulders unmistakable even from far away. After breakfast, which she'd packed for Jackson to eat in the fields, Eleanor would tend her garden, do laundry in the creek, sew for the neighboring ranch wives who paid her well. Mrs. Henderson had been the first to hire her, slightly chagrined by her past rudeness, but desperate for someone who could sew as well as Eleanor. "You've got talent," the older woman had said, examining Eleanor's work. "My daughter Sarah could learn a thing or two from you." Eleanor had simply smiled and accepted the commission. She held no grudges. Her life was too full, too happy, to waste energy on resentment. In the afternoons, she'd prepare supper, pot roast with vegetables from her garden, chicken and dumplings, stews that simmered for hours, filling the house with savory scents. She'd learned to cook from watching her father's housekeeper, but now she poured love into every dish, knowing Jackson would come home hungry and appreciative, and he always did. Every evening, just as the sun started its descent, Jackson would appear on the horizon. Eleanor would watch him approach, her heart swelling with joy and anticipation. He'd wash up at the pump, then come inside, pull her into his arms, and kiss her like they'd been apart for years instead of hours. "Missed you," he'd murmur against her lips. I was right here, still missed you. They'd eat together, talking and laughing. Then Jackson would help her clean up, insisting despite her protests, before they'd settle on the porch or by the fire, depending on the weather. Sometimes they'd talk, sometimes they'd sit in comfortable silence. Sometimes Jackson would read aloud from the newspaper he'd picked up in town while Eleanor sewed. And every night they'd go to bed together, loving each other with increasing passion and tenderness. One morning in late August, Eleanor woke to find Jackson already dressed, sitting on the edge of the bed and watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What is it?" she asked, pushing herself up on her elbows. "Need to go to town today. Got some business with the bank about expanding the herd." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Want you to come with me." Eleanor's heart skipped. She hadn't been to Miller's Creek since their wedding, hadn't faced the people who'd witnessed her humiliation at the social. As if reading her mind, Jackson cupped her face. "You're my wife, my partner. Want everyone to see that. Want you by my side." The determination in his eyes melted her hesitation. "All right, let me get ready." An hour later, they were riding toward town in the wagon. Eleanor wore her best dress, a soft grey one she'd made herself, and Jackson had put on clean clothes. He'd even trimmed his beard, though his hair still fell past his collar in a way Eleanor loved. As they approached Miller's Creek, Eleanor's stomach knotted with nervousness. But Jackson reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Head high," he said quietly. "You've got nothing to be ashamed of." The town was busy, people going about their Saturday errands. Heads turned as Jackson guided the wagon down Main Street. Eleanor could feel the stares, hear the whispers, but Jackson's hand stayed firm in hers. He helped her down from the wagon in front of the general store. "Need to get some supplies. Then we'll go to the bank." Inside the store, Mrs. Patterson, Eleanor's former employer, stood behind the counter. Her eyes widened when she saw Eleanor on Jackson's arm. "Eleanor, I mean Mrs. Stone." The woman's smile was obsequious. "How wonderful to see you, and Mr. Stone, of course." "Mrs. Patterson." Eleanor kept her voice polite but cool. They gathered supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, fabric for new shirts for Jackson. Mrs. Patterson chatted the entire time, asking questions about the ranch, about their life, her tone suggesting an intimacy that had never existed. Eleanor answered minimally, aware of the other customers listening. Sarah Henderson stood in the corner with two of her friends, their expressions a mixture of envy and disbelief. When they'd finished, Jackson paid and loaded the supplies into the wagon. As they walked to the bank, Eleanor could feel the weight of the town's attention. Inside the bank, Mr. Morrison greeted Jackson warmly. "Stone, good to see you." And Mrs. Stone looking well. Jackson conducted his business efficiently, discussing loan terms and expansion plans with a confidence Eleanor found attractive. He included her in the conversation, asking her opinion, treating her like an equal partner. When they emerged back into the sunlight, Eleanor felt lighter. She'd faced the town, held her head high, and nothing had happened except some stares and whispers that didn't matter. "See," Jackson said, helping her back into the wagon. "Not so bad." "No, not bad at all." As they drove out of town, Eleanor spotted Daniel Miller standing outside the saloon. He watched them pass, his expression regretful. Eleanor met his gaze steadily, then looked away. That chapter of her life was closed. On the ride home, Jackson surprised her by turning off the main road. "Where are we going?" Eleanor asked. "Want to show you something?" He guided the wagon up a narrow trail that climbed into the foothills. After about 20 minutes, he stopped in a clearing that overlooked the entire valley. Eleanor could see their ranch in the distance, the house a small dot against the vast landscape. "This is beautiful," she breathed. Jackson climbed down and helped her from the wagon. He led her to a flat rock that provided the perfect vantage point. "Used to come up here when I first bought the ranch," he said. "Felt lost, alone, would sit here and wonder what the hell I was doing." Eleanor leaned against him, and his arm came around her waist. "Last time I was here was the day before the social," Jackson continued. "Sat right on this rock and made a decision. Decided I was tired of being alone, tired of just surviving. Decided I was going to take a chance on something, on someone, even if it scared the hell out of me." Eleanor's heart swelled. "You came to the social for me. Came to the social for us." He turned her to face him. "Best decision I ever made." She kissed him then, pouring all her love into it. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. Want to build a life with you, Eleanor. A real life. Fill that house with children. Grow old watching the sun set over these mountains. Want every day for the rest of my life. You have me, Eleanor whispered. Every part of me, for as long as we both live. They stayed in the clearing for another hour, talking about their dreams. Jackson wanted to expand the ranch, breed better cattle, maybe hire some help. Eleanor wanted to start a small business sewing dresses, maybe teach other women her skills. Together, they painted a picture of their future that was so vivid, so real, Eleanor could almost touch it. When they finally headed home, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and red. Eleanor leaned against Jackson's shoulder, content in a way she'd never imagined possible. That night, as Jackson made love to her with exquisite tenderness, Eleanor felt something shift inside her, a certainty, a knowing, but she said nothing, wanting to be sure before she spoke. The next few weeks confirmed it, the slight nausea in the mornings, the tenderness in her breasts, the exhaustion that hit her in the afternoons, and finally, the missed monthly courses that she'd been tracking carefully. Eleanor stood in her garden one late September afternoon, her hand pressed to her still flat stomach, tears streaming down her face. A baby, Jackson's baby, their baby. She'd wanted to wait to tell him, wanted to be absolutely certain. But when Jackson came home that evening and found her crying in the kitchen, the truth spilled out. "I'm pregnant," she sobbed. "We're going to have a baby." But it wasn't all passion and pleasure. They also talked. Long conversations by the fire about their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Jackson told her about his time in the war, about the things he'd seen and done, about why he'd come west to start over. Eleanor told him about her father's illness, about the debts, about the loneliness of being overlooked and undervalued, about the girls who'd mocked her. "Fools," Jackson growled, pulling her into his lap. "All of them. Don't they know what they missed?" "What did they miss?" "You." He kissed her nose, her cheeks, her lips. "Your kindness, your strength, your beautiful smile. The way you make me laugh even when I'm tired and sore. The way you make this house feel like home." Eleanor's eyes burned with happy tears. "I love you." The words slipped out before she could stop them. They'd been married a month, and she'd been carrying them in her heart for weeks. But saying them out loud felt terrifying. What if he didn't feel the same? What if this had all been about convenience, about loneliness, about "Took you long enough," Jackson murmured against her hair. "Been in love with you since I saw you helping Mrs. Cooper, maybe even before that." Eleanor pulled back to stare at him. "Really, really." His smile was soft, genuine. "Love you, Eleanor Stone, more than I thought I could love anyone." She kissed him then, pouring all her feelings into it, all her gratitude, all her joy, all her hope for their future together. Life settled into a beautiful rhythm. Eleanor's sewing skills brought in extra money when neighboring ranchers' wives hired her. Jackson's herd grew. They talked about children, about expansion, about growing old together on this land they were building. Then one day, in late summer, Eleanor felt the first flutter of movement in her belly. She'd suspected for weeks, but hadn't been certain. Now, with her hand pressed to the small swell of her stomach, she knew. Jackson found her standing in the garden, tears streaming down her face. "What's wrong?" He was at her side in an instant, hands gentle on her shoulders. "Eleanor, what is it?" "Nothing's wrong." She grabbed his hand and placed it on her stomach. "Feel that?" He froze. "Is that our baby?" Eleanor laughed through her tears. "You're going to be a father." The expression on Jackson's face was one she'd treasure forever. Wonder, joy, fear, love, all mixed together in a look of such pure emotion that it took her breath away. "A baby," he whispered. Then louder, "A baby!" He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, actually laughing, in a way she'd never heard before. When he set her down, his eyes were wet. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "Thank you for giving me this, for giving me you, for giving me a family." "Thank you," Eleanor countered, "for seeing me when no one else did, for choosing me, for loving me." Jackson cradled her face in his large hands. "Always will, for the rest of my life and beyond." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The pregnancy transformed their lives in unexpected ways. Jackson became even more protective, insisting Eleanor rest more, hiring a young man named Tom from town to help with the heavier ranch work. He'd check on her constantly throughout the day, his large hand gentle on her growing belly. "Can you feel the baby move?" he'd ask. wonder in his voice. "Not yet," Eleanor would say. But soon, the waiting was sweet torture. Every morning, Jackson would wake her with kisses along her shoulders, his hands seeking her belly before he even opened his eyes fully. "Morning, little one," he'd whisper to her stomach. "Papa's here." Eleanor had never felt more loved, more cherished. Jackson treated her like she was made of glass and steel simultaneously, precious but unbreakable. He insisted she rest in the afternoons, bringing her cool water and fresh fruit. He'd sit beside her, reading aloud from the newspaper or books he'd ordered from back east, his deep voice soothing. One afternoon in early autumn, Eleanor woke from a nap to find Jackson sitting beside the bed, sketching something on a piece of paper. She watched him work, admiring the concentration on his face, the way his large hands could be so gentle and precise. "What are you drawing?" she asked softly. Jackson looked up, a slight flush creeping up his neck. "Nothing important." Eleanor sat up and reached for the paper. Jackson hesitated, then handed it over. Her breath caught. It was a drawing of her, sleeping peacefully, one hand resting on her swollen belly. The detail was exquisite. Every curve of her face, the way her hair spread across the pillow, the contentment in her expression. "Jackson, this is beautiful. I didn't know you could draw." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Used to sketch some during the war. Helped pass the time, keep my mind occupied." "You're incredibly talented." Eleanor studied the drawing, touched beyond words. "Can I keep this?" "It's yours. You're my favorite subject anyway." His hand covered hers on her belly. "You and this little one." Eleanor leaned in to kiss him, slow and sweet. "I love you so much." "Love you too, both of you." When she finally did feel those first flutters, she called for Jackson immediately. He'd been out mending the fence in the far pasture, and Tom had to ride out to fetch him. Jackson came racing back on his horse, sliding off before the animal had fully stopped, his face pale with worry. "What's wrong?" He burst through the door, breathing hard. "Nothing." Eleanor couldn't stop smiling. She took his hand and placed it low on her belly. "Wait." They stood frozen for long moments. Then a tiny flutter, a gentle kick against Jackson's palm. Jackson's eyes went wide. "Was that our baby?" Eleanor whispered, "saying hello to Papa." Jackson sank to his knees right there in the middle of the kitchen, pressing his face against her belly. "Hello, little one," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "This is your Papa. Can't wait to meet you. Can't wait to hold you and show you the stars and teach you everything I know." Eleanor's hand found his hair, stroking the long strands as tears rolled down her cheeks. This moment, this perfect, beautiful moment, she wanted to hold it forever. "I was so scared," Jackson admitted, still on his knees, his arms wrapped gently around her waist. "When Tom came running, saying you needed me immediately. Thought something was wrong, thought I was losing you." "I'm fine, we're fine." Eleanor tugged him up. "Better than fine. We're perfect." Jackson stood and cupped her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "Promise me you'll be careful. No lifting heavy things, no overworking. I can't lose you, Eleanor. Can't even think about it. I promise." "But Jackson, women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I'm strong, healthy. Everything will be all right. Has to be." He pulled her close, careful of her belly between them. "You're my whole world. You and this baby. If anything happened, nothing will happen." Eleanor pressed her hand to his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palm. "We're going to have a beautiful, healthy baby, and you're going to be an amazing father. I know it." That night, as they lay in bed, Jackson couldn't stop touching her belly. Every time the baby moved, his face would light up with wonder. "That's our child," he'd say, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "Our baby, growing right there." "Our miracle," Eleanor corrected. "I never thought I'd have this. A husband who loves me, a child on the way, a real home." "Neither did I." Jackson's hands spread wide over her belly, protective and reverent. "Thought I'd die alone up here on this mountain. Thought that's what I deserved after the things I'd done, the lives I'd taken in the war." Eleanor had heard some of his war stories, but she knew he held back the worst of it, the nightmares that still woke him sometimes, leaving him shaking and covered in sweat, the way he'd flinch at sudden loud noises, the darkness that would creep into his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. "You deserve every happiness," she said firmly. "You're a good man, Jackson Stone. The war doesn't define you. This does. The way you treat me, the life you're building, the father you're going to be. Sometimes I worry I'll be like my old man. He was hard on us, real hard, especially after Ma died. You won't be." Eleanor turned to face him fully. "You have the gentlest hands, the kindest heart. Look how you are with the animals with me. You'll be patient and loving with our child. Jackson pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. Hope you're right. I am. I've never been more certain of anything. The months passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Jackson built a beautiful cradle from pine, staying up late into the night to sand every edge smooth, to carve protective symbols into the headboard. Eleanor sewed until her fingers ached, tiny gowns and bonnets, soft blankets, receiving cloths. They didn't know if the baby would be a boy or girl, but it didn't matter. They'd love this child regardless. As Eleanor's belly grew larger, simple tasks became difficult. Jackson helped her with everything, lacing her boots, reaching items on high shelves, even washing her hair when she could no longer comfortably bend over the basin. "I feel like a beached whale," Eleanor complained one evening as Jackson helped her into bed. "You look beautiful." Jackson's hand traced the curve of her belly, like a goddess, creating life. "There's nothing more beautiful than that." "You have to say that." "You're my husband." "I say it because it's true." He kissed her belly, then moved up to capture her lips. "You've never been more beautiful to me than you are right now, carrying our child, glowing with life and love." Eleanor's hormones had been unpredictable during the pregnancy. One moment laughing, the next crying. But Jackson weathered every mood swing with patience and humor. When she cried because she couldn't fit into any of her dresses, he held her and promised to buy her a whole new wardrobe. When she snapped at him for leaving his boots in the middle of the floor, he apologized and moved them without complaint. "You're too good to me," Eleanor said one night, after a particularly emotional outburst about nothing important. "Impossible. No such thing as too good when it comes to you." Jackson kissed her forehead. "Besides, you're growing our baby, creating a whole human being inside you. You can be as emotional as you want." The community's response to Eleanor's pregnancy had been overwhelming. Women who'd once scorned her now brought gifts, knitted booties, hand-me-down baby clothes, jars of preserves to help her keep her strength up. Mrs. Patterson, her former employer, gave her a beautiful christening gown that had been in her family for generations. "I know I wasn't always kind to you," Mrs. Patterson said as she presented the gown, "but you were always a good worker, honest. And you've made something of yourself. Mr. Stone is a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Eleanor replied, meaning it. Even Sarah Henderson, who'd been so cruel at the social, approached her one autumn day outside the general store. Sarah looked tired, her face drawn. Word around town was that her marriage wasn't happy. "Mrs. Stone," Sarah said, her voice hesitant, "I wanted to apologize for how I treated you at the social. Before that, I was cruel and small-minded." Eleanor studied the younger woman. Time and hardship had humbled her. "It's in the past, Sarah. You were always kind to me, even when I didn't deserve it." Sarah's eyes welled with tears. "You have such a good life now. Such a good man. I'm happy for you, truly." Eleanor reached out and squeezed Sarah's hand. "Thank you. That means a lot." As Sarah walked away, Jackson appeared at Eleanor's side. He'd witnessed the exchange from across the street, his protective instincts on high alert. "You're too forgiving," he said, taking her elbow to steady her. "Maybe. But holding grudges takes energy I'd rather spend on better things." Eleanor took his arm, grateful for his solid strength. "On you, on our baby, on our life together." Jackson kissed her forehead. "One of the many reasons I love you." The winter came early that year, fierce and unforgiving. Snow fell heavy and deep, and temperatures plummeted to dangerous lows. Jackson worried constantly about Eleanor, now in her 8th month of pregnancy. He kept the fires burning high, made sure she stayed bundled in layers of wool and fur, brought her hot tea and warm soup throughout the day. At night, he'd wrap her in blankets and hold her close, his large body keeping her warm. The baby was very active now, rolling and kicking, making Eleanor's belly shift and move in ways that were both fascinating and uncomfortable. "Look at that," Jackson would say, watching a tiny foot or hand press against Eleanor's skin from the inside. "Strong already, going to be a fighter, like his father," Eleanor would reply, "or her mother." Jackson's hand would follow the movement, his expression full of wonder. "You're the strongest person I know, Eleanor." One particularly cold night in February, Eleanor woke suddenly with a terrible feeling of dread. The fire had burned low, and the room was freezing, but it wasn't the cold that had woken her. "Jackson," she whispered, shaking his shoulder. "Something's wrong." He was awake instantly, reaching for her. "What is it, the baby?" "I don't know, I have a bad feeling. Jackson lit a lamp and checked her carefully, his hands gentle but thorough. Does anything hurt? No. But the baby hasn't moved in hours. Usually he's so active at night. Jackson's face paled. Without a word, he dressed quickly and rode through the blizzard to fetch Mrs. Chen, the midwife who lived 5 miles away. He returned 2 hours later, half frozen, with the elderly woman bundled behind him on his horse. Mrs. Chen examined Eleanor carefully, her weathered hands knowing and gentle. After long minutes that felt like hours, she smiled. Baby is fine, just resting. Sometimes they do that near the end, conserve energy for the birth. She patted Eleanor's hand. But you were right to be cautious. Always listen to your instincts, dear. After Mrs. Chen left, Jackson held Eleanor close, his arms trembling slightly. Thought I was going to lose you both, he admitted. Riding through that storm, all I could think about was getting back to you, making sure you were safe. We're fine, Eleanor soothed, running her fingers through his hair. We're all fine. Promise me something, Jackson said, his voice rough with emotion. Anything. If something happens during the birth, if it comes down to choosing between you and the baby, you tell them to save you. Promise me. Eleanor. Jackson, please. His eyes were desperate. I can't lose you. I won't survive it. We can have more children, but there's only one you. Promise me. Eleanor's throat tightened with tears. I promise, but nothing's going to happen. Mrs. Chen says I'm healthy. The baby's healthy. Everything will be fine. Has to be. He pulled her closer, careful of her belly. Because I'm not done loving you yet. Not even close. Need at least 50 more years. Only 50? Eleanor teased gently, trying to lighten the mood. Fine. 100. Forever. Jackson kissed her softly. However long we get, it won't be enough. Eleanor kissed him back, pouring all her love and reassurance into it. Then we'll make every moment count. They spent the rest of the winter preparing, waiting, loving each other through the cold, dark months. Jackson read to her from books of poetry, his deep voice turning the words into music. Eleanor sewed and knitted, her hands never idle. They talked about names, Thomas for a boy, after her father, Mary or Catherine for a girl. What about Matthew? Eleanor suggested one evening. For a middle name. After your brother. Jackson's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. You do that? Of course. He was important to you. He should be remembered. Jackson pulled her into his arms, holding her as carefully as he held everything precious. Thomas Matthew Stone. I like it. Me too. As February turned to March, Eleanor grew more uncomfortable. Her back ached constantly, her feet swelled. She couldn't sleep for more than an hour or two at a time. Jackson did everything he could to help, rubbing her back, elevating her feet, rearranging pillows 12 times a night to help her get comfortable. I'm sorry, Eleanor said one night after waking him for the 4th time. I know you have to be up early. Don't care. Jackson shifted behind her, his hands kneading the small of her back where the pain was worst. You're more important than sleep. Always. I love you. Eleanor whispered. Love you too, both of you. His hand moved to her belly, and as if in response the baby kicked. See, little one agrees. Eleanor laughed, then gasped as another strong kick hit her ribs. This child is going to be a handful. Takes after his mother. Jackson teased. His father, you mean? They fell asleep like that. Jackson curved protectively around Eleanor, his hand on her belly, connected to the life they'd created together. In the morning, everything would change. But for now, in this moment, they were complete. As winter approached, Eleanor's belly swelled. Jackson built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and carving a pattern of stars along the headboard. Eleanor sewed tiny clothes, gowns and bonnets and soft blankets. They didn't know if the baby would be a boy or girl, but it didn't matter. They'd love this child regardless. The town's attitude toward Eleanor shifted during her pregnancy. Women who'd once ignored her now stopped her in the street to offer advice. Mrs. Patterson gave her a beautiful christening gown that had been in her family for generations. Even Sarah Henderson approached her one day outside the general store. Mrs. Stone, Sarah said, her voice hesitant, I wanted to apologize for how I treated you at the social before that. Eleanor studied the younger woman. Sarah had married poorly, to a man who drank too much and worked too little. The marks of disappointment already lined her face. It's in the past, Eleanor said gently. You were always kind to me, even when I didn't deserve it. Sarah's eyes welled with tears. You have such a good life now, such a good man. I'm happy for you. Truly. Eleanor reached out and squeezed Sarah's hand. Thank you. That means a lot. As Sarah walked away, Jackson appeared at Eleanor's side. He'd witnessed the exchange from across the street. "You're too forgiving," he said. "Maybe, but holding grudges takes energy I'd rather spend on better things." Eleanor took his arm. "On you. On our baby. On our life together." Jackson kissed her forehead. "One of the many reasons I love you." The winter was harsh that year. Snow fell heavy and deep, and temperatures plummeted. Jackson worried constantly about Eleanor, keeping the fires burning high, making sure she stayed warm. He'd wrap her in blankets and hold her close on the coldest nights, his large body keeping her warm. "Promise me something," Eleanor said one night as they lay in bed, the wind howling outside. "Anything. If something happens during the birth, don't." Jackson's arms tightened around her. "Don't talk like that." "I have to." Eleanor turned to face him. "Women die in childbirth. It happens. And if it happens to me, I need to know you'll be all right. That you'll take care of our baby. That you'll live." Jackson's jaw clenched. "Nothing's going to happen to you. I won't let it. You can't control everything, Jackson. Watch me." His hand came up to cup her face. "You're not leaving me, Eleanor. I just found you. Just started living again. You're not leaving." The fierce determination in his voice made her smile despite her fears. "I'll do my best. That's all I ask." The baby came in early March during a late snowstorm. Eleanor's water broke just after breakfast, and Jackson immediately sent Tom racing to town for the midwife. Then he stayed by Eleanor's side, holding her hand through each contraction, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement. "You're doing so well," he'd say. "So strong, so brave." The labor was long and difficult. By nightfall, Eleanor was exhausted, delirious with pain. Jackson never left her side. He held her through each contraction, let her squeeze his hand until his fingers went numb, supported her when she needed to walk. "I can't," she sobbed at one point. "I can't do this anymore." "Yes, you can." Jackson lifted her face to look at him. "You're the strongest woman I know. You can do this. We can do this together." The midwife, Mrs. Chen, had arrived hours earlier. She checked Eleanor regularly, her expression calm despite the difficulty of the labor. "Not much longer now," she said as midnight approached. "The baby's almost here." And then, with one final push that tore a scream from Eleanor's throat, their son entered the world. The baby's cry filled the room, strong and healthy. Jackson's face transformed with wonder as Mrs. Chen placed the tiny, wrinkled infant on Eleanor's chest. "A boy," Eleanor whispered, looking down at the tiny face. "We have a son." Jackson's hand covered both of theirs, his touch impossibly gentle. "He's perfect. You're perfect." They named him Thomas, after Eleanor's father, and Jackson cried when he held his son for the first time. "Never thought I'd have this," he whispered, looking down at the tiny bundle in his arms. "A wife, a child, a real family." "You deserve it," Eleanor said from the bed, exhausted but happy. "You deserve all of it. We both do." Jackson carried Thomas over to her, settling the baby in her arms, before climbing onto the bed beside them. "His family. We both deserve this." The first weeks with Thomas were exhausting. The baby woke every few hours to nurse, leaving Eleanor sleep-deprived and emotional. But Jackson was there for everything. He changed diapers, walked the floor with Thomas when he was fussy, rocked him to sleep so Eleanor could rest. "You're a natural father," Eleanor said one night, watching Jackson cradle their son against his broad chest. "Had a good teacher." Jackson looked down at Thomas with such tenderness it made Eleanor's heart ache. "My pa died when I was young, but I remember how he was with Matthew and me. Firm but kind, patient. That's the kind of father I want to be. You already are." As spring bloomed across the high country, Thomas grew. He had Jackson's grey eyes and Eleanor's smile. He was a happy baby, content to be held and loved. Jackson would bring him out to the porch in the evenings, pointing out the mountains and the stars, telling him about the ranch he'd one day inherit. "This is all yours, son," Jackson would murmur. "Yours and your mama's. Built it for you. For our family." Eleanor would watch them from the doorway, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This was the life she'd dreamed of but never believed she'd have. A home, a family, love that filled every corner of her world. The summer Thomas turned one, tragedy struck the neighboring Henderson ranch. Mr. Henderson, Sarah's father, died of a heart attack. The ranch was mortgaged heavily, and the bank threatened foreclosure. Sarah's husband had drunk away what money they had, leaving the family destitute. When Eleanor heard, she didn't hesitate. She rode to the Henderson ranch with food and supplies, finding Sarah alone with her two small children, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what to do," Sarah sobbed. "We're going to lose everything." Eleanor held her while she cried, then helped her make a plan. Jackson bought some of the Henderson cattle at a fair price, giving Sarah enough money to pay off part of the debt. Eleanor arranged for Sarah to work as a seamstress, teaching her the skills that had kept Eleanor afloat during her own difficult times. "Why are you helping me?" Sarah asked one day, as Eleanor showed her a complicated stitch. "After how I treated you." "Because everyone deserves a second chance," Eleanor said simply. "Someone gave me one. I'm just passing it forward." Jackson supported Eleanor's efforts without question. He hired Sarah's oldest son to work on their ranch, giving the boy wages that helped support the family. He never complained when Eleanor spent hours helping Sarah learn to sew, never begrudged the food and supplies they gave. "You have the biggest heart of anyone I know," he told Eleanor one night. "I just remember what it felt like to need help and have no one offer it. That's why I love you." Jackson pulled her close. "You never let your pain make you cruel. You let it make you kind." As the years passed, their family grew. 2 years after Thomas, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter they named Mary. She had Jackson's dark hair and Eleanor's brown eyes, and she was the apple of her father's eye. "Look at her," Jackson would say, cradling Mary in his massive hands. "She's going to break hearts one day." "She's 2 weeks old," Eleanor would laugh. "Don't care. She's already the most beautiful girl in the territory." Another 2 years brought William, a quiet, thoughtful boy who loved to read and study the world around him. Jackson built an addition onto the house to accommodate their growing family. The ranch prospered, the herd multiplying, their land expanding, but success didn't change Jackson. He remained the same hard-working, devoted man who'd claimed Eleanor at that long-ago social. He still kissed her goodbye every morning and hello every evening, still held her close at night and whispered how much he loved her, still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. Eleanor's sewing business grew as well. She employed 3 other women now, including Sarah Henderson, who'd become one of her closest friends. They created beautiful dresses for women across 3 counties, and Eleanor's reputation for quality and fair treatment spread. "You've built something amazing," Jackson told her one evening as they watched their children play in the yard. Thomas was teaching Mary to rope a fence post while William read under a tree. "We built something amazing," Eleanor corrected. "All of this, the ranch, the family, the life we have, we built it together." Jackson pulled her against his side. "Best partnership I could have asked for." Sometimes when Eleanor went to town, she'd see Sarah Henderson or the other girls from that long-ago social. They'd aged poorly, married to men who didn't cherish them, trapped in lives of quiet dissatisfaction. They'd look at Eleanor with her handsome husband and beautiful children, at the way Jackson still held her hand in public, at the obvious love between them, and she'd see the regret in their eyes. But Eleanor never gloated, never rubbed it in. She'd simply smile and continue on her way, secure in the knowledge that she'd found something they never would. She'd found a man who saw her, really saw her, who valued her for who she was, not who society said she should be, who'd stepped forward when everyone else turned away and claimed her as his own. On their 10th anniversary, Jackson surprised her with a trip back to Miller's Creek for the spring social. Eleanor hesitated. She hadn't been back since their wedding. "Trust me," Jackson said, that small smile playing at his lips. So she wore her best dress, one she'd sewn herself in rich emerald green, and let him lead her into the community hall. The music swelled, couples danced, and every head turned to watch them enter. But this time, the looks weren't pitying or cruel. They were envious, admiring, because Eleanor Hartfield Stone was no longer the invisible girl in the borrowed dress. She was a woman secure in herself, a wife, a mother, a success. Jackson held out his hand, just like he had 10 years before. "May I have this dance?" Eleanor placed her hand in his. Always, they swept onto the floor, and it was like coming full circle, except this time Eleanor wasn't pretending, wasn't dreaming. This was her life. This beautiful, impossible, perfect life. "Happy," Jackson murmured against her ear. Eleanor looked up at her husband, at the man who'd saved her, who'd chosen her, who'd loved her beyond all reason, happier than I ever imagined possible. Good, he pulled her closer, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way. And he did. Every single day for the rest of their long, beautiful life together, Jackson Stone made Eleanor feel seen, valued, loved. The invisible girl had found her home in the arms of a mountain man, and she'd never been more visible, more cherished, more whole. Their love story became legend in Miller's Creek. The cautionary tale turned triumph, the reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories start with the simplest act of courage, standing up for someone who needed it, seeing someone everyone else overlooked, and saying 4 simple words that changed everything. This woman's with me.